I'm Callie Tran, 32 middle child and part-time bookstore manager. The night air tasted like sugar and smoke. Mom's backyard had been transformed into a Pinterest-worthy birthday celebration, peach and gold streamers, fairy lights dangling from the pergola, linen-covered tables with floral centerpieces no one would remember. Music hummed from hidden speakers tucked between pots of overwatered orchids, and laughter floated from the crowd like something rehearsed. I stood at the gate, holding a paper-wrapped box with a cream silk ribbon and my name written in tiny block letters on the tag. No one had noticed me yet. That wasn't unusual. My sister, Amanda, with her baby on her hip and a law degree on her tongue, had just made her grand entrance 5 minutes earlier. Guests flocked to her like bees to royal jelly. My brother, Vince, was already in the center, telling one of his predictable consulting firm stories that always included flights, cocktails, and vague prestige. The security guy Mom had hired, a 20-something in a tight suit with an earpiece, stepped in front of me. "Can I help you?" I glanced up. "I'm Callie. I'm her daughter." I gestured toward the house. His eyes scanned the guest list on the clipboard. Names not marked. She probably forgot. I was invited. He squinted. "You got a wristband? I know. Look, I've brought a gift." I held up the box like it meant something. He paused. Then, with less aggression and more awkward sympathy, he tilted his head. "Sorry. No entry without the list or wristband." It took me a second to realize this was really happening. My face got hot, but I tried to stay neutral. I stepped aside, pretending to scroll on my phone like maybe I was just early, just checking something. Behind the gate, someone shouted. Amanda's baby just said, "Nana." A cheer erupted. Of course. I pressed my lips together and let the paper-wrapped box dangle at my side. The ribbon brushed my wrist like a sigh. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one they forget, the one who shows up and still doesn't belong, even when it's your own family, just let me know in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you've ever stood at a gate holding something no one will open. I didn't cry. I'd done it already. I turned to leave, walking toward my car with the box tucked against my chest like a child. Then I heard it. "Wait. Hold on." A woman's voice. Firm. Sharp. I looked back. A figure in a dark silk blazer was walking down the stone path. It was Mrs. Ethel Lynn, the local councilwoman. Mom's old boss. Not someone I expected to even remember me. Callie Tran, she called. Everyone at the party turned. Conversations died like candles snuffed in a gust. "Yes," I said, standing straighter. She raised her voice just slightly. "Are you the one who curated the Memorial Library collection at Hawthorne?" The crowd stared. I nodded, slowly. "I just gave a speech about that last week," she said, stepping closer. "Your name is on every plaque," murmurs began. I saw Amanda glance up, baby on her hip, lips parting. Mom was frozen near the cake table. Ethel turned to the security guy and said, flatly, "She's not on your list. Add her. Twice." The security guy moved aside. I stepped through the gate, and the atmosphere changed like a cord had snapped. Eyes followed me now. Whispers stirred like leaves in a sudden wind. And Mom. Mom stared at me like she hadn't seen me in 10 years. The ground beneath my feet felt unfamiliar, like the grass had been replaced with carpet or ice. I walked slowly into the backyard, the gift still clutched in my hand. I didn't know where to put it anymore. The box had felt like a burden at the gate, but now it burned in my grip with a strange new weight, like evidence, like proof I hadn't come empty. People didn't talk to me, not directly. They whispered behind champagne flutes. "Is that her? The one who did the library thing? I thought she lived in Oregon." I did. For 6 years. I moved back 2 months ago. No one asked why. No one had noticed. Amanda approached first. Her heels clicked against the stones like a metronome of performance. "Callie," she said, tone bright and forced. "You didn't say you were coming." I smiled with my lips only. I was on the list. "Remember?" Her face flinched slightly, then recovered. "You should have come earlier. We were all taking pictures by the garden wall. The light was perfect." I lifted the box slightly. "I brought something for Mom." "Oh," she said, surprised. "Well, you can put it on the side table near the cake." She motioned vaguely. "We're doing gifts later. Or maybe not. Depends how tired she is." I walked past her before I replied. I didn't need a place in the schedule. I needed a place in the house. The table near the cake was covered in shiny bags, gold foil, pink glitter, designer brands. I cleared a small space and placed mine gently in the corner. It looked like a wrapped book. Too neat, too thoughtful. It didn't shine. Then I saw her. Mom stood near the buffet, dressed in lavender. Her hair swept into that familiar low bun she'd worn since we were kids. Her earrings glinted, pearls probably real. Her smile had returned, turned now toward Vince, who was recounting his latest trip to Dubai. "It's all business class now," he joked. She laughed like it was the best thing she'd heard all night. She hadn't come to me, not even after Ethel's announcement, not even when the whole party paused. I walked over anyway. "Hi, Mom," I said. She turned, smile still half frozen. "Callie. Oh my goodness. You're here." "I am. You should have told me. We didn't prepare a seat. I was at the gate," I said, quietly. "Security didn't know me." "Well," she said, smoothing her napkin as if the fabric could excuse anything, "we weren't expecting everyone to arrive at once. And you've been so distant lately. I moved back months ago. I thought that was temporary. You didn't say anything at Christmas. I wasn't invited to Christmas." Her lips pressed together like she was trying to erase the words from the air. I let the silence sit between us for a moment. I wanted her to feel it. Then I added, "I brought you something." She blinked. "A gift?" "Yes." Her eyes flicked toward the table. "Oh, that was from you." She hadn't even checked. She'd walked right past it. "It's something I found in a used shop in Montmartre. A first edition of the poetry you used to read to us. From the nights you didn't fall asleep early." She didn't respond. "I thought you'd like it. That was years ago," she said finally, glancing at her wine. "We all move on." I swallowed the taste in my throat. It wasn't bitterness. It was dust. Behind her, someone tapped a glass, a cousin ready to give a toast. A circle was forming around the cake table. People were clapping, already assuming positions for photos. Amanda reappeared, adjusting Mom's necklace. "Come on. Mom, time for candles." Mom let herself be guided, not looking back. I watched them sing. I watched them light 20 candles, even though she was turning 62. Each candle flickered like a tiny lie, one for each time she rewrote the story, one for each child she remembered more brightly. I stood behind the hedge and felt invisible again. Ethel had tried, but even recognition from the outside didn't rewrite blood. I didn't stay for cake. I walked back toward the side gate. It was slightly ajar now. No one was guarding it. I suppose I was no longer a threat. The night was darker than before. The fairy lights smiled sharp against the blackness. I passed the table of gifts. My box was still there, unopened, untouched. I reached out, then stopped. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a matchbox. I don't know why I had it. Habit. Maybe memory. I struck one match. Just one. The flame danced for a second in the stillness. Then it vanished. Not the house. I didn't light the house. But I lit something else, 12 small candles on the edge of the stone wall. The ones no one had bothered to notice, left in the lanterns from a wedding months ago. I lit them slowly, one, then another, until the wall behind the gift table glowed, until the shadows stopped pretending they didn't know my name. Someone finally saw. A voice behind me said, "Hey, did you do that?" I turned. A teenager, maybe one of Amanda's in-laws, was looking at the candles with wide eyes. "They look beautiful," he added, almost afraid to compliment it. I nodded. They were just waiting to be lit. Then I walked away. And from the road. I looked back once, just once, and saw that the gift was finally glowing. The street was quiet by the time I reached my car. The night had cooled, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened to rain, but never quite followed through. I sat behind the wheel, keys in my lap, engine off. The dome light glowed weakly above me, catching dust motes that drifted like ash in the still air. I didn't drive away. Not yet. Inside the house, they were probably cutting cake. Someone would crack a joke, another would spill wine, and maybe someone would point toward the wall of candles and ask, "Who did that?" But it wouldn't matter. The moment would pass. The gift would be swept up with the others, forgotten or confused. I didn't leave because part of me still needed to understand something. Not about them. About me. How had I become the person who didn't knock louder? Why did I stand at gates instead of doors? 2 weeks earlier, I had seen Mom at the market. She was walking out of the florist's with a bouquet of tulips and laughing into her phone. I stood across the street. She didn't see me. I didn't wave. I remember thinking she looked younger, not in age, but in energy, as if motherhood had been something she was finally free of. I had spent most of my childhood trying not to be in the way. I didn't demand attention like Amanda. I didn't charm it like Vince. I just existed, got good grades, stayed out of trouble, taught myself to cook when Mom forgot dinner, applied to colleges on my own, paid my own deposit. No one came to move me into my dorm. I built a life with empty spaces in it, spaces I never told anyone about. The car headlights behind me blinked once. I startled, but it wasn't anyone I knew. A neighbor pulling into their driveway. I turned the key and the engine rumbled to life. But instead of heading home, I drove toward the old neighborhood, the streets I hadn't driven down in years, the corners that still knew my footsteps. Past the library with the mural I helped design in high school, past the abandoned bookstore where I used to sit for hours, hiding between aisles, and finally, to the little duplex where Mrs. Kenner still lived. She had been my 6th grade English teacher, the first adult who noticed when I stopped speaking so much. Her porch light was on, as always. I parked and walked up the path, giftless, planless, just present. I knocked. She opened the door faster than I expected. "Callie." I smiled. "Hi. Well, look at you," she said, her voice warm like velvet. "Come in. I've got peppermint tea and leftover lemon pie." I was just about to put on the kettle. Inside, everything smelled the same. Pine cleaner and old books and something sweet beneath it all. She poured tea without asking if I wanted any. It didn't matter. She always knew. "I heard you were back," she said, sitting across from me. "I saw your name in the city newsletter. Something about restoring a historical collection." I nodded. "Yeah. I helped reopen the archives at Hawthorne. We cataloged over 300 letters and manuscripts." Her eyes lit. "That sounds like something you would do." I let the words wash over me. "I went to Mom's party tonight." She set down her cup carefully. "Ah, I wasn't on the guest list." Her face didn't shift much, but something about the air changed. "I'm sorry. It's not new. No, she said softly, but it's still heavy. We sat in silence. I remembered how, years ago, I had written a short story for her class about a girl who lived inside a mirror. She could see everyone, hear everything, but no one ever saw her unless they needed a reflection. Mrs. Kenner had pulled me aside after reading it, asked if I was all right. I'd said I was just being creative, but she had known. You know, she said now, you don't have to wait for them to name you in the story. You can write yourself in. I tried. And tonight I lit the candles on her wall. Not the cake. The house candles. The ones no one touched. She smiled. Not with her mouth. With her eyes. That sounds like you, she said. Silent. Deliberate. Beautiful. We talked for an hour. About nothing. About everything. And I didn't realize how much I needed to be heard until my voice no longer felt sharp from use. When I left, she gave me a folded napkin with 2 slices of lemon pie and a note that just read, "You were always enough." I didn't cry until I was back in the car. But not the sad kind of crying, the kind that cleans. That weekend, I unpacked the boxes I had left untouched since moving back. I hung the framed certificate from the Hawthorne Preservation Society. I put the bronze plaque they gave me, the one with my name etched in cursive, right on my bookshelf. And I pulled out the manuscript I'd been working on, a memoir I never meant to write. It opened with a scene at the gate. No metaphors, no symbols, just a woman with a paper-wrapped gift, waiting to be let in. On Monday, I walked into the bookstore like nothing had happened. The scent of paper and wood polish greeted me like an old friend. Morning light slanted through the front windows and touched the poetry shelf where I'd alphabetized Yeats next to Zagajewski. Out of sequence. Just because I liked the symmetry. Sam, the college student who helped on weekends, was leaning against the counter, halfway into a croissant and tapping on his phone. "Morning," I said, sliding behind the counter and turning on the register. He glanced up. "Hey, that party you went to, was it good?" I paused. "Yeah, it was exactly what I expected." He grinned. "That bad?" "Huh." I smiled without answering. Sometimes it was easier to let people think they were exaggerating. The bell on the door jingled, and a customer walked in, an older man in a blazer and jeans, holding a city council folder under his arm. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Harlan, the director of the Municipal Preservation Board. He came up to the counter and nodded politely. "Ms. Tran, do you have a moment?" I nodded, stepping aside with him toward the reading alcove near the bay window. "We were very impressed with your work on the Hawthorne Archive," he began. "The council's been reviewing candidates for the upcoming Neighborhood Revitalization Grant. We'd like you to be involved in the selection process, possibly even lead the panel." I blinked. "Me? You're the only one who's touched those documents in 20 years, and you kept the spirit of the place intact. You've got something people can't fake." It was the first time someone had said that to me. The acknowledgement landed like fresh air after too long underground. He handed me a folder. "Look it over. We'll follow up by Friday." After he left, I sat with the folder in my lap, staring out the window. Across the street, a mother walked by holding her child's hand, pointing at a mural painted on the old post office. I remembered being the child. I remembered being the one who asked questions and didn't wait for answers. The folder held maps, grant criteria, and a list of candidates who'd applied for restoration projects, places I knew well. Forgotten corners of the city where families had once gathered, where bakeries sold bread that smelled like home. I imagined my mother seeing my name in a council bulletin. Would she clip it out, mention it at the next dinner party, or would she skip it like she skipped over my gift on the table I didn't know, and I didn't care as much anymore? That night, I walked past her house again. Not to spy, just to pass. I told myself I was taking the long route home, but my feet knew better. The candles I'd lit were gone, snuffed, cleaned up, the wall bare again. But something else was there, my gift. The wrapping had been removed. The book, a worn edition of Les Fleurs du Mal, sat perched atop a windowsill behind the lace curtain. I couldn't tell if it had been opened, but it had been placed in view, as if, maybe, it had been seen. The next evening, I received a message from Amanda. Hey, Mom asked if you're free for tea on Sunday. Just her. No guests. I stared at the text for a long time. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to, but part of me hesitated. When Sunday came, I dressed simply black pants, a blue sweater. I brought nothing. No gift. No script. No expectations. Mom opened the door before I knocked. She looked older than at the party. Her hair was unpinned, her face bare of makeup. "Come in," she said. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. I followed her into the kitchen. The kettle was already whistling. She poured water into 2 delicate cups and added jasmine leaves by hand. "I use the good china," she said, as if that mattered. We sat in silence. Spoons clinked. Steam curled upward like breath held too long. "I read it," she said finally. I glanced at her. The book, yes. Her eyes stayed on her cup. "You remembered?" Of course I did. I forgot I used to read that aloud. I forgot I even loved poetry. I sipped, waited. "I don't know why I treated you like a stranger." I did. But I didn't say it. "I think," she continued. "I was afraid. Afraid that you were too much like me. And I hated myself for years. That I hadn't expected. I loved books," she said. "I wanted to teach. But I married young. Had you 3. And the rest just took over. Amanda was loud. Vince was charming. And you faded in." I offered. She nodded. "And I let you." We sat in silence. The tea cooled. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "I know," she whispered. "But I want to give you something anyway. Just time. A seat. A page in the story." I looked at her. And for the first time in years, I didn't see the mother I had been trying to reach. I saw a woman with regrets. And that, somehow, made her more real. "I don't need the story to start over," I said. "But I wouldn't mind writing a few new chapters." She smiled. It didn't fix anything, but it made space. After tea, I stood at the door, about to leave. She reached out and lightly touched my wrist. "Thank you for the book," she said. "You're welcome." I walked out into the fading light, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops. And for the first time, I felt no need to turn back. The wall might stay there, or she might write it herself next time. Either way, I was done waiting outside. A week later, I stood in front of the community hall, holding a clipboard instead of a gift box. The revitalization panel had just wrapped its first in-person review, and I'd been asked to speak briefly before the room emptied. Rows of folding chairs faced me, half filled with faces I vaguely recognized: architects, city planners, a few old teachers. I cleared my throat. "Preservation isn't about keeping the past frozen," I said. "It's about letting memory breathe in new rooms, with new windows. It's about seeing something again and realizing it matters." Some people nodded, others jotted notes. One woman smiled with her eyes closed, as if the words had landed somewhere personal. After the meeting, while the chairs were being stacked and the coffee table stripped bare, Ethel Lynn approached. She wore the same silk blazer from my mother's party. "I knew you'd fit," she said, not offering it as praise, but as a fact. "Thanks for pushing me through the gate. You were always meant to walk past it." She handed me an envelope. Just a small honorarium, she said. But more than that, I wanted to thank you. Your work, your eye, it's built from patience, and people forget how valuable that is. That night, I walked home, not drove walked. I took the long way, cutting through neighborhoods I used to rush past, skipping cracked sidewalks where I'd once tripped chasing lost thoughts. When I reached my apartment, the lights of the city had dimmed to a soft, golden hum. I let the envelope rest on the counter and opened my window instead. The air smelled like rain, though it hadn't fallen. I stood there, quiet, breathing, letting it all in. 2 days later, I found a small white envelope slipped under my door. No name on it. Inside was a handwritten note in my mother's careful cursive. I don't know if you remember, but you once asked me why I didn't clap for your recital. I told you I had a headache. I lied. I was tired of pretending to be a good mother. And you didn't deserve that. I'm sorry I never said this before. You were brilliant. You are still brilliant. Love. Mom. I sat down on the floor, the note trembling in my hand. I hadn't thought about that recital in years. I was 13. I had played Chopin's Prelude in E minor, hands shaking the whole time. I finished, stood, bowed, and all I saw was her looking at her watch. Back then, I thought it was my fault, my mistake. I hadn't played well enough. It had never occurred to me that the silence was hers to carry. That evening, I found myself back at her house. I didn't plan to go inside. I just stood across the street, looking at the window where the poetry book still sat. She'd turned it slightly, now it faced inward, like something private, something she kept. Then I noticed something else. The wall. She had lit the lanterns. All 12. I crossed the street slowly, unsure if I was imagining it, but the flickering was real, warm, moving shadows against the brick, each flame small but insistent. The gate wasn't locked. I stepped through. Mom appeared at the door before I knocked. She didn't seem surprised. She just stepped aside, letting me enter without a word. Inside, the house smelled different, less like wine and potpourri, more like ginger and old paper. She led me to the living room, where a small table was set with just 2 chairs. On the tray, tea, lemon slices, and ginger cookies that tasted like childhood. You remembered I liked these, I said. I never forgot, she replied. I just didn't remember at the right time. We talked that night. Not about anything grand, not about what she missed or what I carried. Just about where I bought my new coat, what books I was reading, how Amanda's daughter had started painting with her fingers, all reds and yellows. At one point, she reached across the table and took my hand. Callie, she said, I won't pretend I was good at all this. I wasn't. But I want to try, even if it's late. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I said, I just want to be seen. She nodded, eyes glassy. Then I'll try to look properly this time. We finished our tea in silence, the way only people who've truly begun can. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. She texted more, small things. A photo of a flower she'd seen, a quote from a poem. Once, just the word, thinking of you. And I responded, not with expectation, but with openness. The bookstore got busier as spring edged in. Sam brought in his guitar on Thursdays and played soft jazz by the window. Customers lingered longer. One afternoon, a girl about 10 years old came in with her father and asked, Do you have a book about someone who doesn't belong, but finds their place anyway? I knelt beside her. I think we do, I said, but it might take a little time to find. When she left, her hands clutched a book I had once loved and forgotten, Harriet the Spy. That night, I worked on my manuscript. I titled the next chapter, Candles don't burn without a spark. I wrote about the party, the silence, the flame, and I wrote about the match I never lit, the one in my chest. It didn't explode. It didn't burn down her house, but it burned quietly, and it warmed the wall. Sometimes, that's all it takes. To stop being invisible, to stop waiting for a seat and build your own table, to walk through the gate and let your name echo only once, but clearly, to light the candles not for revenge, but to be seen by your own light, and to finally understand you were never the extra. You were always the beginning. Spring deepened. The cherry trees on Elgin Street bloomed early that year, shedding pale pink petals like secrets. At the bookstore, we moved the poetry table closer to the front window. I wanted passers-by to see it the way I once needed someone to see me. I stocked it with collections I loved: Audre Lorde, Mary Oliver, and that slim, yellowed volume of Baudelaire I'd spent years chasing across continents, the same one I'd wrapped and given to my mother. She visited the store for the first time in April. I was refilling the display of notebooks when the bell above the door rang and I looked up. There she was, wearing a wide sun hat, soft mauve lipstick, and that expression she used when pretending not to be nervous. I didn't call attention to her arrival. I let her move through the shelves slowly, stopping at the memoir section, picking up titles she probably wouldn't buy. She lingered at the back where the children's books were. Then, finally, she came to the poetry window. She picked up the Baudelaire again. Not the gift copy. Another edition. She thumbed through the pages, stopped at a stanza, and smiled at something private. I came to stand beside her. She didn't look up as she said, "I'd forgotten how much I used to love these words, the way they cut and heal in the same breath." I said nothing. The silence between us wasn't painful anymore. It felt like space. She bought 3 books, one poetry, one history, one children's story about a hedgehog who builds a library out of pine cones. At checkout, she placed a small white envelope next to her receipt. Something I wrote. She said, "You don't have to read it now." After she left, I slipped the note into my pocket without opening it. I wasn't ready, and that was okay. Weeks passed like footsteps now measured, present. The revitalization project gained momentum. I led a team of 4 volunteers, 3 retired teachers, and 1 quiet girl named Leon, who reminded me of myself at 16. All curiosity and hesitation. We visited each site on the application list: abandoned theaters, broken schoolhouses, old gardens that had gone wild with neglect. I took photographs, recorded oral histories, transcribed interviews with people who hadn't been asked to remember in years. One afternoon, Leon and I sat on the broken steps of a community center scheduled for demolition. "I never thought stories mattered much," she said, not looking at me. "But when you ask people about the floorboards or the crack in the paint, they tell you about their mothers, their friends, the dances they went to. It's like the building holds it." I nodded. Places remember what people try to forget. She glanced at me, eyes soft. "Is that why you do this?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully, "It's the only way I've learned to stay." She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't need to. One evening, I came home to find a small cardboard package outside my door. No label, just my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside the original poetry book, the one I had given her, pressed between pages 37 and 38, was a Polaroid. It was me, age 11, sitting cross-legged in the living room with a paper crown on my head, reading aloud from a book too large for my lap. Mom sat behind me in the photo, half smiling, holding a candle. On the back of the photo, she'd written, You were always the light. I just didn't know how to look at it. I didn't cry. I lit a candle on the windowsill, then another. I opened the book to the marked page and read the poem aloud softly, to no one in particular. The next morning, I placed the photo in a small frame near the register at the bookstore, not on the wall, not under glass. Just there, present. Sam noticed it first. "Is that you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "A long time ago." He nodded. "Looks like you already knew who you were." The bookstore held a small open mic night in May. It wasn't well attended, 10 or 12 people, most reading their own poems. One guy doing surreal haikus about tax audits. But it was warm, honest. My mother came. She didn't read, but she sat in the front row, smiling, laughing softly, clapping before anyone else. Afterward, as we stacked chairs and folded blankets, she approached me and held out a small velvet box. "I know birthdays aren't your thing anymore," she said, "but this belonged to my mother. She gave it to me when I left home. I never passed it down because I didn't think I had anything worth giving, but I do now." Inside was a brooch, silver, shaped like a flame, with a tiny stone at the center, amber, or maybe just old glass. I touched it gently. "It's beautiful." She smiled, like its owner. The weight of her words didn't crush me, it grounded me. In the months that followed, we created a rhythm. Tea on Sundays, walks on Tuesdays, no explanations, no pressure, just time. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we sat in silence, but always, we stayed. That fall, my manuscript was accepted by a small press. Nothing fancy, no advance, but real, bound, named. It would be called Candles on the Wall. When the proofs arrived, I mailed the first copy to her house. No note, just the book. 3 days later, I found a package in my mailbox. Inside, one of her handwritten recipes, ginger cookies. And on the back, in faint ink, page 86. "Thank you for writing the fire." I taped the recipe to my refrigerator, not to preserve the past, but to remember how it had finally begun to burn right. The book release came quietly. No velvet ropes, no speeches, no tablecloths with curled corners. Just a Friday evening at the bookstore, warm lamplight cooling the candles, 20 chairs borrowed from the community center, and a stack of advance copies wrapped in recycled paper and bound with thin twine. I wore black slacks and a gray cardigan. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't rehearse. The only thing I prepared was a small index card tucked in my back pocket with a single line. "You are allowed to be here." Mom arrived 10 minutes early. She brought Amanda. I hadn't expected that. Amanda's heels clicked against the hardwood floor with the same precision they always had, but her eyes were softer than I remembered. She looked at me like she wasn't quite sure how to behave around this version of me, like maybe I was someone worth relearning. "I read it," she said, after our first awkward hug, the chapter about the recital, page 42. "I remembered the dress you wore, pink with a velvet collar. You were so small." "You laughed at me," I said, not accusing, just naming. She didn't flinch. "I did. I was cruel. I didn't get it then, but I do now." Mom stood behind her, holding a single daffodil. "You know they don't sell these this time of year," she said with a nervous smile. "I had to call 3 florists, but you said once they were your favorite." "I did," I said, "when I was 12. She held it out like it was a treaty. I took it, not because it fixed anything, but because it meant something had shifted. The crowd filled in slowly. People I knew vaguely, people I didn't know at all. A former customer who used to come in every Thursday for biographies, Leon, from the Preservation Project, brought her younger brother and sat cross-legged on the floor. Sam ran the sound check. The mic buzzed once, then settled. I stood at the front of the room with my book in my hands, its matte cover soft beneath my fingers. I looked out at the people not searching for anyone, just letting them exist. I used to think being seen was about applause, I said into the mic, about getting someone to name you in a room full of strangers. But now I think it's about being able to stand still, about not flinching when your name is said out loud. I read a chapter, not the saddest one, not the angriest one, just the one where I lit the candles. The room was quiet, but not heavy. It breathed. When I finished, no one rushed to clap. It took a few seconds. Then the sound came slow, rising, sincere. Amanda was crying. Mom wasn't. But her hands trembled. Afterward, as people filtered toward the back table for cookies and tea, she pulled me aside. "You didn't make me a villain," she said. "You weren't," I replied. "You just stopped seeing me." She nodded. "I see you now. We didn't hug, but we didn't need to." Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind to clean. Sam had left already, and the tea kettle was still warm. I sat in the front window with a cup of chamomile and watched the streetlights flicker. That's when I saw the girl, maybe 10, maybe younger, standing outside the window with her hands pressed to the glass, eyes wide, staring at the poetry table. I opened the door. "Hi," I said. "Want to come in?" She shook her head. "I'm just looking. Anything you want to see closer?" She hesitated, then pointed. "The one with the bird on it." I walked over, picked up the book, and handed it to her. She held it like it was made of feathers. "My mom's in the car," she said. "She doesn't like when I ask for things." "You can have it," I said. She looked up sharply. Really, just promise me something." She waited. "Write your name inside it, and never let anyone say you don't belong in the story." She grinned, took the book, and ran back to the car. I watched the taillights disappear down Elgin Street. Inside the store, the air smelled like jasmine and ink. I walked to the back and turned off the lights. Before I left, I lit the 3 candles on the wall behind the register, the ones no one had noticed for months. Now, they flickered in perfect rhythm. When I stepped outside, the night wrapped around me like an old coat, familiar, warm. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew the light would stay lit, and I knew who lit it. In the months that followed, life didn't change with a flourish. It shifted like sand, soft and slow. No announcement, no applause, just the kind of transformation that settles into your shoes without you noticing until one day you stop walking the way you used to. Mom and I developed a rhythm. Some weeks she came to the bookstore, always on Tuesdays, always with some excuse that didn't need to be said aloud. I was in the neighborhood, or I thought you might be low on tea. Other weeks, I went to her house and sat in the kitchen while she kneaded bread or arranged flowers or wiped down already clean counters just to fill the space. The conversations were cautious at first, but they grew roots. "I read about you in the neighborhood journal," she told me one day, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Your panel helped fund that sculpture park. I walked through it yesterday." "Oh," I said. "What did you think?" She paused. It felt honest, like it wasn't trying too hard to be anything except what it was. I blinked. "I think that's the nicest compliment I've ever gotten." She smiled. I meant it. Sometimes, she asked about my childhood. Not to apologize, just to understand. "Did I really forget your birthday that year?" she asked once. I nodded. "It was the same day Amanda had her piano recital. You told me I could pick a cake the next day, but we never did." "I remember the recital," she said slowly. "I remember Amanda crying in the car. I don't remember forgetting you, but I believe you." That's enough, I said, and it was. At the bookstore, things bloomed. We hosted more readings, more workshops. Sam organized a summer poetry slam, and it brought in high schoolers with too many metaphors and not enough structure but endless courage. One girl, Fiona, wrote a poem about a grandmother who named her after flowers she could never afford. Another boy, Evan, scribbled verses about shadows in the hallway and called it Wednesday. I watched them and felt something uncoil in me. I didn't envy their beginning anymore. I honored it. One afternoon, I found myself shelving a new batch of memoirs, titles with gold foil and dust jackets that felt like silk. But one slim volume caught my own. Candles on the wall, nestled between Educated and the Glass Castle. It looked small, quiet, but it belonged. A woman picked it up and turned to me. "Is this any good?" I smiled. "I think so." She flipped to the first page. "Read a line." Then another. "Did you write this?" I nodded. "I didn't think people like us wrote books." "What kind of people?" She hesitated. "The ones who don't get invited. The ones who come with gifts and leave with silence." I nodded again. "Then maybe it's exactly the book for you." She bought it. Asked me to sign it. Her name was Corinne. That night, I wrote her name in my journal. Not because she was a fan, but because she reminded me of myself. In July, the city hosted a heritage gala. The Preservation Board nominated the sculpture park for public recognition, and I was invited to speak. It was black tie, stiff chairs, and too many shrimp cocktails. But Mom came. She wore a simple navy dress. The brooch I'd given her silver with a faint amber glow pinned near her collarbone. The same one she once said she couldn't wear because it didn't match anything. Now, it matched everything. Amanda came too. She brought her daughter, Nia, who sat through most of the ceremony drawing cats on the back of the program. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage with calm feet. I didn't need to breathe through nerves. I just breathed. "I used to think history was a building," I said, "a shape we walk into and out of. But it's not. It's what we leave behind on the walls. The marks, the silence, the names we forget to speak aloud." The applause was polite. No one cried. That was fine. I wasn't there for tears. I was there to exist. After the gala, Mom held my arm as we walked back to the car. "Your father would have been proud," she said. It was the first time she'd mentioned him in years. "I think he was," I replied. "We didn't talk about how he died when I was 15, or how, for 3 months after, she never left her bedroom, or how I made dinner and packed school lunches and learned to fold the laundry without waking her. None of it needed to be spoken. It had already been said between the pages of the book, and she had read every one. One evening in late August, I walked past the old elementary school. They were tearing it down bulldozers and fences, the playground half gutted. I stood at the edge of the site, watching pieces of my past collapse. The swings were gone. The mural I helped paint in 5th grade, 2 girls holding a globe between them, had been scrubbed from the wall. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked home and wrote about it. A short essay, Things That Disappear Without Permission. I published it in the bookstore's newsletter. It became the most read piece of the year. The final surprise came in the form of a letter. Real paper. Real ink. It was from Vince. We hadn't spoken since the party. "Callie, I read your book. I didn't recognize myself at first. Then I did. And it made my stomach twist. I don't know how to say sorry without sounding like a fraud. But I want to say this. I saw you. Back then. I just didn't know how to make space. I'm learning now. P.S. I named my daughter after someone who wrote stories. Maybe one day, she'll read yours. V. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal. Not to hide it. To keep it safe. That night, I sat in my living room with a candle burning low. Mom had gone home. Amanda had texted me a photo of Nia drawing flowers in sidewalk chalk. Sam had left a sticky note on the register tomorrow's poem theme: forgiveness. Bring something real. I closed my eyes. The past was still there, still jagged, still raw in places, but the light no longer hurt. It glowed. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't lit the candles on her house to punish anyone. I lit them so I could find my way back, so I could show others where I stood. And now, when people look up from the street, they don't just see the store, they see the light in the window, and they come in. Fall slipped into the city like a soft breath, leaves curling at their edges. Sidewalks coated in the hush of golden dust. At the bookstore, we changed the window display. Sam arranged bundles of cinnamon sticks between books about change, grief, and second chances. I placed a tiny chalkboard sign near the entrance. If you feel like a leaf about to fall, come sit with us a while. The message felt right, honest. Customers noticed. They lingered longer now, their fingers tracing spines, their eyes flicking toward the back room where we hosted quiet writing circles on Thursday evenings. We called them unspoken habits. No formal rules, no readings, just pens, silence, and the unspoken agreement that it was okay to write what we couldn't yet say. Mom came once. She arrived without fanfare, wearing a raincoat and holding a bag of shortbread she'd baked from a recipe she'd sworn she forgot. She didn't write anything. She just sat by the back wall, listening to the scratch of pens and the occasional click of nervous fingers against mugs. At the end, she handed me the bag and said, "I wanted to contribute." That was her way. Quiet gestures, no declarations. Later, I found one of her cookies tucked into a napkin with a line written on it in pencil. Even mothers need permission to return home. I slipped it into my journal between pages covered in half-finished paragraphs and smudged edits. That line never left me. Meanwhile, Amanda had started therapy. She mentioned it in a voicemail that played while I was shelving a new delivery of used books. "I thought I had everything sorted," she said. "Turns out I'd built a mansion over a sinkhole. Just wanted you to know I'm digging now." I didn't call her back immediately, not because I didn't care, but because I did. And I wanted to respond with something that came from my core, not just my reflex. I mailed her a blank notebook with one line on the inside cover: "Every page holds the courage to begin again." She sent a photo 2 days later. The first page had a sentence: "Today I stopped apologizing for being afraid." I saved it. One crisp Saturday morning, I walked with Mom to the sculpture park we'd helped restore. The sky was pale blue, the kind of quiet sky that asks for reflection. We sat on a stone bench near the willow trees. Kids played in the distance, their laughter folding into the rustle of leaves. Mom looked around, then said, "I didn't expect it to be this peaceful. It's not always." I said, "But it's holding something now. That makes a difference." She traced the edge of the bench with her fingers. "Did I ever tell you I almost went to art school?" "No. I wanted to study textile design. I had a whole portfolio. But then your father proposed. He had this job offer and thought it was time. I waited. I said yes because I thought it was what grown-ups did. You choose a life, and you stick with it. I didn't know you could choose again. You still can," I said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not art school, but maybe I'll start sketching again. Start with the willow trees." I said. They forgive easily. We walked the long way back to her house, our shadows stretching ahead of us like children who weren't in a hurry. In late October, a storm knocked the power out across the neighborhood. The bookstore was closed for 2 days. I used the quiet to clean the back room and finally open a dusty box I'd been avoiding letters I'd written to myself during college, but never mailed. I'd titled them Evidence of Existence. Each one began with a date, a place, and a line I didn't remember writing. Some were hopeful, some cracked, some so sharp they cut my breath. One said, "No one clapped," but I played the whole piece anyway. I folded that letter and pinned it on the community board near the register. The next day, someone wrote underneath in red pen, "That's how I've lived my whole life." We started a trend after that. Letters to nobody, read by everyone, blank cards by the window, pushpins on the wall. People shared, some signed their names, most didn't. One card read, "I forgave my mother today." She didn't know how to mother what she didn't understand. Another, "I stayed, even when I thought I should run." Even Vince contributed. He mailed his card in an envelope labeled, "For the wall." It read, "I looked at my daughter and realized I didn't want her to grow up thinking silence is strength. So I spoke. I cried when I read it. Then I pinned it next to the others." By November, word had spread. A local journalist stopped by to write a feature on the bookstore and our silent confession wall. She interviewed me over peppermint tea and asked, "Why do you think people trust this space?" I didn't have a rehearsed answer. So I told her the truth. Because someone once let me stand at the gate for too long, and I promised I'd never make anyone else wait to be let in. She nodded, wrote something down, asked me to spell my name twice. I didn't mind. The article ran on a Sunday. Full page, black and white photo of the window display, the candles glowing behind glass. Headline: The Bookstore That Listens. Mom framed the article and brought it in on Tuesday. She hung it on the back wall without asking, so no one forgets. She said, "Forget what I asked, that your story changed more than just your life." We stood there, quiet again, the right kind of quiet. That evening, I hosted one last writing circle for the year. The final prompt was simple: write a letter to the version of yourself who stayed silent the longest. I wrote mine without hesitation. "Dear girl outside the gate, you didn't need permission to be extraordinary. You were born with enough light to build your own entrance. I'm sorry it took so long for the world to notice. I'm sorry it took so long for you to believe it didn't matter. You are here now. You stayed. You lit the candles. And you were never invisible." I folded the letter, read it aloud. No one clapped. No one needed to. The wall of letters glowed behind us. The candles burned steady. And for the first time, I didn't just feel included. I felt whole. Winter came with its hush. Not dramatic, not cruel, just slow, like breath on glass. The city softened beneath it, edges blurred, sound muffled. At the bookstore, we switched to warm lights and left the basket of cards by the front door labeled, "Take if you're cold, return if you can." People always return them, on the first snowfall. I arrived early and found Mom already inside. She stood by the poetry shelf, turning the pages of a Mary Oliver collection like someone rereading an old letter. She didn't hear me at first. Then she looked up and said, "She writes like she's whispering in a cathedral." I smiled. "She writes like she's forgiving the sky." We brewed 2 cups of cinnamon tea and sat on opposite sides of the reading nook in the window, watching flakes drift past like slow, deliberate thoughts. Mom hadn't said much about Christmas. I hadn't asked. We both knew the holidays came with their own shadow, but this year felt different. Not easier, but braver. "Do you remember the Christmas you gave me socks wrapped in newspaper?" she asked. I laughed. "You mean the ones I stuffed with lavender because I didn't know what else to give. They smelled like grief and hope. I wore them until the soles gave out." I looked at her. "I didn't think you even noticed." "I didn't say thank you then," she said. "But I remember now." She reached into her coat and handed me a small envelope. No ribbon, no flourish, just my name, in her handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, a sketch, pencil on faded paper. It was me, age 9, sitting on a windowsill, knees pulled up, staring outside with a book in my lap. The lines were delicate, not exact, but unmistakable. Her signature curved in the corner. I drew that the night your father died, she said. You sat like that for hours. I was too numb to comfort you. So I sketched. I wanted to keep you still, because you look like something I could never hold again. I didn't speak. My hands trembled slightly as I held the drawing. I found it last week, she continued, buried under a pile of old bills. I thought maybe you should have it now. I nodded. Not because I understood, but because I was ready to. Later that week, Amanda called. She was planning a small Christmas dinner quiet, just immediate family. She asked if I'd come. No pressure, no guilt. Mom said you might not want to, she said, but I told her maybe we should try inviting you before assuming you'd say no. That's new, I said. I'm trying. I agreed. And when Christmas came, I arrived late on purpose, not to make a statement but to protect myself. Just a little. The house was warm. Soft music played. No one jumped to greet me, but Amanda took my coat, and Vince handed me a mug of cider. Nia ran up with a drawing. It's a library made of snow, she announced. You can't go inside unless you whisper. I laughed. I wouldn't want it any other way. Dinner was awkward in moments. Amanda over-explained things. Vince apologized too much. But there were flickers, real ones, of something better. After dessert, Mom stood up. I have something to say, she began. Her voice was even, but her hands gripped the back of her chair. This family, we haven't always done right by each other, and I haven't always done right by you. She looked at me. I forgot birthdays. I dismissed achievements. I let silence do the talking. Amanda shifted uncomfortably. Vince cleared his throat. But this year, Mom continued, I read something that changed me, a book that held a mirror to all the moments I refused to see. And the author is sitting at this table. She paused. Callie, she said, thank you for writing what I didn't have the courage to say. Thank you for still coming back. I didn't respond with words. I just reached out and placed my hand over hers. That was enough. After the dishes were cleared, Amanda and I stood in the kitchen together, drying plates. You know, she said, I thought for a long time that strength meant being the loudest in the room. And now I asked. Now I think maybe it's being the one who stays, even when no one claps. I smiled. That's a start. Before I left, Mom pulled me aside. She handed me a slim box. Open it later, she said. At home, I sat on my bed, wrapped in a blanket, and opened it slowly. Inside was a necklace, a single silver candle on a fine chain. No gemstones, no engraving, just a shape I had seen before, etched into the spine of my book, carved into the edge of that long-forgotten party wall. Taped to the bottom of the box was a note. You were the light all along. I just didn't know how to see in the dark. I put the necklace on. It felt like belonging. In the weeks that followed, I wrote again. Not about her, not about the past, but about the middle, the soft, ordinary chapters that come after the hurt. When healing isn't cinematic, it's quiet, domestic, faithful. I wrote about how tea tastes different when someone remembers how you like it, about how a mother can learn to speak again, about how family isn't always built from blood, it's built from return. And at the end of every new piece, I signed the same words. To the ones who stood at the gate and waited. Your story is not over. People kept writing to me, letters, emails, postcards with messy handwriting and tear stains. One woman wrote, I lit a candle in my mother's kitchen. She didn't say anything, but she left it burning. A teenager wrote, I brought your book to my family dinner and read a page out loud. My uncle asked me to read more. A man in his 70s wrote, I called my daughter for the first time in 4 years. We didn't say much, but we didn't do that either. Each message a flicker, each word a match. One night, after closing, I stood outside the bookstore and looked through the window. The poetry shelf, the candle wall, the notes from strangers pinned beside words that once lived only in my journal. I saw myself reflected faintly in the glass. Not the girl holding the gift no one wanted, not the one waiting to be named, but the one who had stayed, who had lit the candles, who had kept the door open. And I whispered to the glass, I'm here now. I'm still here. Then I stepped back inside, the warmth wrapped around me, and I let it. February arrived quietly, like someone slipping into a room late and hoping no one noticed. The days were longer by a breath, the light returning not in floods, but in slow, golden fingers that crept across the bookstore floor by afternoon. Snow still blanketed the sidewalks in soft layers, but beneath it, something unseen had already begun stirring. One Tuesday, Mom brought a binder with her. We sat at our usual table by the back, steaming cups of rooibos between us, and she slid the binder across to me. It's a project, she said, eyes flicking down. A small one, nothing official. I opened it. Inside were printouts of old family photos, newspaper clippings, and scanned pages from a journal in cursive handwriting I didn't recognize. That's Grandma Lean's journal, she said. I found it in a sealed box in the attic. She wrote during the war, during her crossing, during the early years here. I turned a page slowly. The ink was faint but legible. One line stood out on the third page. We left with nothing except names we were told not to say too loudly. She never spoke about this, I whispered. She didn't know how, but she wrote it all down. I looked up at her. You're making an archive. She smiled, almost shyly. You inspired me. I felt something bloom inside me quietly, like spring waking up under the snow. We spent the next few weekends cataloging what we found. Amanda joined us one Saturday. She brought labels, post-it notes, and colored tabs. And after a few hesitant hours, she admitted, I like this. It's like translating ghosts into something you can touch. Even Vince came by once, holding Nia's hand, and contributed a box of his own. Photos from Dad's side, he said, and some old cassettes. He recorded bedtime stories once. I didn't know they still existed. We set up a long folding table in the bookstore's back room and laid everything out like offerings. It wasn't for display. It wasn't even for anyone but us. But we needed to see it all, to name it, to give it a place. One entry from Grandma's journal lingered with me for days. My daughter is soft-spoken but sharp. I think she carries a fire she doesn't know she has. I only hope I do not blow it out with my own breath. I read it to Mom. She didn't speak. She just placed her hand over the page and left it there. March brought a surprise. The city's literary council announced its shortlist for the Heritage in Memoir Award, and Candles on the Wall was one of 5 finalists. I didn't expect it. I hadn't submitted the book. Someone else had. Probably Ethel Lynn. She never said. But I saw the email one morning while making toast and spilled my tea before reading the rest. I told no one at first. I needed the moment to settle. When I finally brought it up to Mom, she sat still for a long time. If you win, she said. What would you want to say, I think? I said. I just want to thank the silence for making me pay such close attention. She nodded. Then you already know how to win. The ceremony was scheduled for the end of the month. It wasn't grand, just a modest gathering at the city library's top floor. I wore a simple dark blue dress. Amanda offered to do my makeup. Just let me help, she said. Not because you need it, but because I want to. Vince drove. Mom sat in the back seat beside me, holding my hand like I was 7 again, and we were going to my first piano recital. Inside, the space was filled with authors, organizers, volunteers, no red carpets, just shelves and hearts. The host read the nominees with care. Each name felt like a stone laid gently on water. Then she said, "And the Heritage in Memoir Award goes to Callie Tran for Candles on the Wall." I froze. The applause came slowly. I didn't stand right away. Vince nudged me. Amanda whispered, "Go." Mom just smiled. She didn't clap. She kept her hand on her chest, holding the moment like a breath. I walked to the podium. My heart didn't race. It pulsed like a drumbeat I'd heard since I was small. I looked out into the room. When I wrote this book, I began. I didn't think anyone would read it. I wrote it because I needed to know if what I lived mattered, even the parts no one remembered. I paused. I didn't grow up being clapped for. I grew up holding matches and hoping someone would notice the light. So if this book lit anything for you, even for a second, then I'm grateful. Not because I was seen, but because we were. I didn't cry. Not then. But when I stepped down, Mom was waiting at the edge of the room, tears in her eyes, arms open. She held me tightly, then whispered, "You lit the candles." I just followed the glow. The next morning, I returned to the bookstore early, alone. I unlocked the front door, turned on the lamps, and stood in the center of the room for a while without moving. Then I lit the 3 candles behind the register. I pulled out my journal and wrote a letter, not to the readers, not to my family, to the girl who once stood at the gate, holding a forgotten gift. Dear Callie, you were never missing. You were simply early. You arrived at a door they hadn't learned to open yet. But you knocked anyway. You waited. You left. You returned. You lit the first flame, not because anyone asked, but because you needed the light. You didn't burn the house. You warmed it. You didn't seek revenge. You offered recognition. And in doing so, you found your own name again. I'm proud of you. I signed it. Me. Later that afternoon, a little girl came into the store with her father. She had a gap-toothed grin and carried a notebook twice the size of her backpack. She wandered to the wall of letters, read a few. Then she asked, "Can I leave one too?" "Of course," I said, handing her a card. She wrote in big, uneven letters, "One day, I'll write stories too. But first, I want to learn how to light a candle." I pinned it to the wall, right in the center. Then I stood back and watched the light flicker. Not just from the flames, but from the words. And I knew without doubt, without ache, without waiting. This was home. This was the ending I didn't know I was writing, and the beginning I'd waited my whole life to live. The spring I turned 33. I found myself walking past the house I grew up in. It was unplanned. I had taken a different route home from the community center where we'd just launched a program for young writers, most of them shy, brilliant, still afraid of their own voices. The kind of children I would have quietly sat next to and offered a blank notebook without a word. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The sidewalks were cracked in the same places. The hedges were a little taller. But the old house, our house, stood exactly as it had in memory: pale green shutters, a crooked mailbox, the oak tree out front still clutching its leaves as if it didn't believe in seasons. I stopped at the edge of the yard. It was empty now. Mom had sold it a few months earlier. Downsized. She'd moved into a smaller home closer to the park, with fewer stairs and more light. She didn't say much about the sale, only that she was ready to let some ghosts go. I hadn't returned since. I hadn't needed to. But today, I stood at the curb and looked at the windows, each one a former version of myself. The upstairs one I used to press my forehead against the cold glass and stare at the moon. The kitchen window where I once held up a drawing, waiting for her to turn and see it. The back porch where Dad taught me how to tie knots, whispering as if the string would remember better than I would. A man opened the front door, young, maybe late 20s. He nodded at me politely. "Sorry," I said, stepping back. "I used to live here." He smiled. "Oh, are you the daughter we found a couple of books in the attic with the name Callie written inside?" My breath caught. "You did?" "Yeah." One had poetry, the other was a notebook full of stories about a candle that walked and talked. My wife read them out loud last week. My face warmed. That was mine. I wrote those when I was maybe 8. "Well," he said, "you had a gift even then. Want them back?" I hesitated. "No. Keep them. Maybe your kids will read them one day." He nodded. "Thanks for leaving them behind." As I walked away, I felt strangely full, like something old had just been properly folded and shelved. At the bookstore, the wall of letters had outgrown itself. Sam suggested we create a rotating display, a kind of living exhibit in the front window. We called it the Quiet Wall. Every week, we selected 5 letters from the community board and copied them by hand onto linen paper. People stopped to read them the way they once stopped to check the weather. One read, "My mother never said I'm proud of you, but she made soup every Thursday. I understand now." Another, I came out to my brother. He didn't hug me, but he built a shelf for my books the next day. One was simply, "I forgive you. You'll never know it. But I do." Even people who didn't go inside stood to read. Some cried. Some smiled. One day, a stranger left a rose beneath the window with a note. This saved me today. It became something more than a wall. It became a mirror. People trusted. The local school district asked me to speak at a career day event, not because I was famous, but because the librarian had read my book and said, "We want our kids to know that success doesn't always look like a spotlight. Sometimes it looks like a lamp." So I went. I wore jeans and a soft blazer. I carried no slideshow, no handouts. Just myself, and a dog-eared copy of Candles on the Wall. The classroom was quiet when I entered. Rows of 8th graders sat with their backs too straight, their hands too still. The teacher introduced me by reading the first paragraph of my book. I stood in the silence that followed. Then I asked, "How many of you have ever felt invisible?" Every hand went up. "How many of you thought it was your fault?" Most hands stayed up. I told them about the gift I brought to my mother's birthday, how it sat unopened on a table while people danced around it, how I left quietly, how someone saw me anyway, how I came back not to belong, but to light something I hadn't known was waiting. I told them, "You are not small. You are just early." Afterward, one girl with ink on her fingers handed me a folded note. I opened it in the parking lot. It said, "Today I decided not to quit writing, because maybe one day, someone will need my words, too." I kept that note. I pinned it inside my closet door. It's still there. In May, Amanda hosted a family picnic at the sculpture park. It was her idea, entirely. She sent invitations through printed cards, decorated with Mia's drawings. We sat beneath a sycamore tree on a wide blanket. Vince brought sandwiches. Mom brought peach tea in a thermos older than I was. I I brought a small speaker and played quiet music that didn't need to be named. At one point, Amanda leaned over and said, "I read your second manuscript." My heart skipped. "You did?" She nodded. "It's softer than the first, like you're writing with both hands now, truth and hope." "I'm trying." She sipped her drink. "You don't have to try so hard anymore. You know, we're not expecting you to carry all of us." I looked at her. "I'm not carrying you. I'm just not hiding anymore." She smiled. "That's more than enough." Later, Nia asked me to walk with her through the path of statues. We paused at one shaped like an open book with flowers growing through the spine. She pointed. "This one reminds me of you." "Why?" "Because it looks like something that hurts and heals at the same time." I bent down beside her. "That's what a good story does." She reached for my hand. "Will you help me write mine one day?" I squeezed her fingers. "Any day." On the last day of spring, I lit 12 candles on the bookstore wall. It wasn't a holiday, no anniversary, just a day like any other. But as the flames flickered, I sat by the register and watched the light dance across the letters pinned on the board. Some were fading now, edges curling, ink bleeding, but none of them had been removed. Because stories don't expire, they just wait to be seen again. A woman came in as the sun began to set. She walked slowly, paused at the letter wall, and took a long breath. Then she came to the counter and said, "Do you have the book about the woman who wasn't invited, but came back anyway?" I nodded. I placed candles on the wall in her hands. She held it like it was a mirror. Then she whispered, "I think I'm ready to light something now." And I knew the story was never about revenge. It was never about proving anything. It was about finding your way home, even if no one's waiting, even if you have to light the candles yourself, and even if the house is dark, because some of us weren't born to be celebrated. We were born to hold the match.